So that's one example that we know of, and there have been many others of their attempts to target critics of British foreign policy in relation to Russia and Ukraine. I mean, the most recent one, of course, is the famous Masongate emails. Have you come across that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like
Paul,
do you
Paul
want to
Mason.
explain what this is for people who are listening that aren't this deep into it?
Yeah. So a couple of months ago, some emails were leaked from Paul Mason, the left-wing journalist who'd been sort of a supporter of Corbyn, but then a critical supporter of Corbyn, kind of in the way of Owen Jones. And these emails were with him and this guy called Amil Khan, who runs this PR firm, which has been contracting for MI6 in Syria and in Lebanon and other places. And they were also involved in discussions with this guy called Andy on Proton Mail. And it turned out that this guy, Andy, was a guy called Andy Price, who's a career MI6 officer, still serving in MI6 in the Foreign Office. And we knew he was MI6 because he'd been involved in running the integrity initiative, the previous project. He was in charge of this thing called the Counter Disinformation and Media Development Program in the Foreign Office, which is a MI6 project, which is, if you look at it, if you look it up, if you Google it, you can get the Foreign Office's documents on this program. They're online, and it says, there's different bits of it, and coordination of the program is by, and it's blanked out. They've redacted the organization which is coordinating this program, and that's because it's MI6. so Mason was making all these plans with Andy Price to do a replacement for the integrity initiative, but something that would be more sophisticated, so that we wouldn't find out, we wouldn't work it out. And he was saying, on Ukraine, that the people he wanted to go for an attack really were the far left rogue academics on Ukraine, who'd been doing stuff on Russia and Syria, and now we're doing stuff on Ukraine. And the far left rogue academics, of course, is me and some of my colleagues who've been working on this, for example, on Syria and propaganda, who worked on the Skripal case, the alleged poisoning of the former Soviet spy in Salisbury, and who've been doing work. We've been making public statements about Ukraine. So this was a left-wing journalist plotting directly with an MI6 officer how to attack what he referred to as rogue left academics, and that's people who have no institutional power at all. I mean, it's extraordinary, and that's the level which our intelligence services are operating. It's truly scandalous.
Yeah, quite ironic. I actually had Paul on this show, a year and a half ago, last summer, I think.
Yeah,
Um, after I got an advanced copy of his book, How to Fight Fascism, which is really funny when he's working working in conjunction with state intelligence agencies in order to silence people speaking out in a way that they don't like. That is
amazing.
quite amazing. Yeah. Oh, the irony. But
Well, I know. I first met Paul on the demonstration against the G8 summit in Gleneagles in 2005, and we got in contact then. And later, he was instrumental in getting me on Newsnight with Paxman to criticize the BBC over its coverage of Iraq and to talk about independent media. And so, I mean, in a way, we were comrades, but now he's plotting with MI6 to deliberately target me personally and others who've been doing similar work on propaganda on Syria, on Ukraine, on Russia, etc. It's extraordinary.
what do you think happened?
I think what happened is Paul has always been, pro NATO, and his line was. I mean, I didn't realize this at the time, but I remembered that back in 2018, I think I'd written this piece about Russia and misinformation, and I'd quoted something that Paul Mason had written about how, the left should just have radical economic policies and focus on class and shouldn't deal with the foreign policy issues. We should leave the intelligence services alone, and that would be how we would get into power. And of course, that was a moderately influential tributary of ideas into the Corbyn project. But that was already by that stage. I mean, who knows if he was already in touch with Six by then? But he certainly later on he certainly was in touch with Six, and is effectively an agent of MI6. And I use that term advisedly in the sense used by MI6 itself on its own website. You can go and look that up. I mean, I think this is it's a thing where you see we deal with the class issues, we don't deal with international questions. We leave that to the intelligence services. It's too much for us to handle, and that's the way we'll get into power. And of course, when you come to imperial adventures like the British role in Iraq, and then subsequently the Libyan adventure, and then after that the Syria, the attempt to regime change in Syria, where they got up to all sorts of stuff, which is still not really properly come out into the public domain. And then you're on to Russia and Ukraine, where, I mean, we're now starting to see a little bit more critical coverage of the Ukraine conflict, and the stuff that's been in the press recently about Boris Johnson flying out to meet Zelensky to tell him he wasn't going to be surrendering and wasn't going to get involved in the negotiations with the Russians. And of course, there's been a really quite extraordinary deluge of propaganda over the whole Ukraine thing, which is perhaps, I think, I mean, I've been looking at this kind of thing for decades, but perhaps surpasses what was done in Iraq. And I mean, we're in a position where the people who are pulling the strings of our perception of Ukraine are not only the Ukrainian government and the military, but actually the intelligence services of France, of the US, and of the UK too, and trying to pretend that this is a viable fight, that we can give Putin a bloody nose, that Putin is losing, that the sanctions are going to work. I mean, the most extraordinary thing about it really is the fact that the sanctions immediately, within days, were blowing back on the West, and everyone can see that now. That the sanctions have not hurt Russia in the least. I mean, when Putin is told you can no longer be part of the SWIFT payment system, he's like, well, okay, we'll do our own one then. I mean, you can't sanction the country which produces the world's most oil and gas and wheat and agricultural fertilizers through Belarus. I mean, you simply can't do that. And you would think that the people who ran the EU and who are responsible effectively for neoliberalism would understand that. You would think they would understand how capitalism operates, but it appears that no, they don't.
Yeah, it's when you say so when you say that the strings are being pulled to push a certain narrative, and there's been a lot of propaganda about the Ukraine war. Like, first off, it's interesting for you to say it's worse than during the Iraq war, because, well, like, I wasn't old enough to take this in at the time. I would have been 9 when we invaded Iraq. But so that's interesting that you think it's even heavier. But like, what message for people that maybe just and for myself actually, like, what message is it that you believe is being pushed that isn't accurate, basically?
Well, first of all, there's actually a proper war going on, and that the Ukrainian forces haven't been, from very, very early on a hiding to nothing, and obviously going to be defeated. I mean, the Russians aren't messing about here. I mean, they're going to win, and the question is only when and how. And the huge amount of weaponry that's been poured in, of course, so quite a lot of that's been siphoned off for the oligarchs and their mates. But the huge amount of weaponry which has gone in, we've seen some of it in action. It still hasn't made any difference, and it won't make any difference. I mean, that's the reality is that the Russians have been taking this slow and steady, and they have had some setbacks, but they are not going to lose. And so that's why Zelensky was always months ago now was saying, well, we have to negotiate. And Boris goes in and says, no, you can't be doing that. We won't let you. So this is a fight by the West, as people have been saying to the last Ukrainian.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for us in the comments below. Let me know what you thought and if you'd like to see more of this from the show. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.